Section 4. You will hear a university professor giving a lecture on the American Revolution. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Okay now, settle down everyone. Let's get on with our lecture. As you all know, the American Revolution occurred during the last half of the 18th century, when 13 colonies in North America broke free from the British Empire and combined to create the United States of America. What you may not know, however, is that the American Revolution was the result of social, political, and intellectual changes that took place in early American society. This series of changes had begun in the early 18th century and was known as the American Enlightenment. Concepts such as freedom from oppression and religious freedom came straight from the Enlightenment, and it was concepts like these that shaped the country in the 18th century. At the time, Americans were becoming fed up with the way they were being ruled by Britain and the taxes they were obliged to pay in order to help finance Britain's wars in many parts of the world. Using the ideas of the Enlightenment, they claimed that the British government had no right to tax Americans or pass any laws in America, because Americans did not have democratically elected representatives in the British government. They declared these taxes unfair and eventually took up arms against the British. So, as you can understand, the American Revolution was in fact the direct result of the ideas of the Enlightenment. As a result of the British government's actions, Americans began to create their own local governments in many states. First, they rejected the authority of the Parliament of Great Britain to govern them from overseas without representation, and then they expelled all royal officials. In 1774, Americans organized the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Here, 56 delegates met to discuss their problems and consider their options. In response to this, the British sent combat troops to America, banned local governments, and imposed direct British rule. Consequently, Americans took up arms, and the first skirmishes broke out. This led to the Battle of Lexington in April 1775, the first organized battle of the American Revolution. In this battle, the British troops were defeated and were forced to retreat to Boston. In the summer of the same year, the Second Continental Congress was held in order to organize the defense of the states and urge each state to set up and train its own military force. In March 1776, George Washington, the commander of the new American Army, forced the British to leave Boston. The Americans were now in full control of all 13 states and were ready to declare independence. So, on July 2nd, representatives from each of the original 13 states voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, which rejected the British monarchy and established the independence of the new nation, the United States of America. Many battles were fought over the next few years, and, at times, it seemed that the new American nation was about to lose the battle for independence against the superior and well-trained forces of the powerful British Empire. But the battle between the young David and the mighty Goliath slowly started to turn. In early 1778, the French decided to enter the war in support of America, becoming the first country to officially recognize the United States of America. A year later, Spain also became an informal ally when it declared war on Britain abroad, meaning that the British Empire found itself having to fight a global war in many locations around the world. As a result, the British were forced to withdraw many troops from America in order to protect their profitable colonies, which were considered more important than the newly independent nation. The situation soon became very difficult for the British, and after 8,000 British troops were forced to surrender at the Battle of Yorktown in October 1781, the war effectively ended. The nation was now at peace, and 2 years later, the British formally abandoned any claims to the United States when they signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783. This was just a brief summary of the events that led to American independence. We'll discuss the most important battles and events that took place before and during the American Revolution in more detail next week. So I expect all of you to study chapters 1 through 4 of your textbooks for Monday morning's class. Now, any questions?
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.